Welcome everybody back to the Growing Money with Sean Trace podcast. I've got a really interesting guest with me today, and would you like to tell people who you are and a little bit about what you do?
Yeah, Sean, I would. Thank you so much for having me. My name is Angie Carlson. I am a financial coach for couples, and I help them break free of all the money rules so that they can start enjoying their wealth without the guilt.
That's awesome. I like that you work with couples because there's been multiple times that I talk to people, and let's look at it this way. It's. I think physical fitness is one of the areas that people kind of understand this better. I remember a long time ago when I was a kid, and my dad was having some health challenges, and he needed to change the way he ate to help have longevity. And my mom made the food for the family, and she was open to stuff, but it was really challenging for her because he suddenly had to eat in this very extreme way. No fats, he was dealing with some heart challenges, a high cholesterol, and they were like, you got to just get rid of everything this way. And my mom sitting there like going, oh my goodness, how do we do this? And so he would have to do his meals separately, which we figured out. But it was challenging to have one person doing something completely different, and you see that. Like, let's imagine that you're at home and you're like, I'm going to get in shape. So I'm not going to eat any of this unhealthy food. And I'm going to go to the gym, every day of the week. Well, you go to the gym, you're feeling good, you're eating healthy. And then your partner brings home the super barbecue sandwich that is, with the extra cheese and guacamole. And you're just looking over going, oh, that barbecue sandwich looks really good. And you shouldn't do it, but it's really hard if you're not on the same page. But you see couples that say, hey, New Year's resolution, we're going to get in the gym. And they go together, they change together, and they succeed and win together. Talk to me about what pulled you toward working with couples.
Yeah, so what pulled me towards working with couples was really my relationship. I married a fantastic man that was raised in a very different way than I was. And so my parents were married 2 days shy of 48 years till my mom passed. He watched 6 divorces. And so one thing we noticed in our communication when we look back on our struggles with money was like we were using the same terms with money, but we were putting them through our own filter. And so I'll just give you an example of that. So like when we would use the phrase bad with money, for me, we laughed about it. It's like we wasted $20, big, who cares? His family, that would be mom's filing for divorce. And so anytime I would say bad with money, he assumed I was going to leave him. And I had no idea that I was even doing this because he just would get the feeling and like this anxiousness and get upset. And I was just like, why are you pissed off about $20, dude? But I wasn't saying that either because I just assumed he knew my filter and he assumed I knew his filter. And it wasn't until we were having one of those conversations that you really don't want to have aired in public that he just blurted this out. And I was like, is that what you've always thought I was going to do when I said that? And he was like, well, yeah, that's what people do when they're bad with money. And I was like, oh my God. Like it was like a light bulb went off. And so then we really had to look at our communication style and realized our budget didn't work for a decade, not because of a lack of effort, but because of a lack of communication, a lack of being on the same page. And when we cleaned up the money communication side of this, we went from being in consumer debt to paying our house off in just under 6 years. It was wild how quickly things cleaned up because we learned how to talk to each other, to appreciate each other's perspectives, appreciate what the other one went through, realizing like, hey, my spouse is bringing this up because this is something he saw that I've never seen before. And he is trying to protect me and be my partner in this and not be like, oh, let's go through something difficult again that I went through because you haven't been through it. And so that really has led me to develop my coaching program, my coaching method, and everything really around that money communication topic for couples. Because yes, the numbers are important. Yes, we need to have a financial plan. But if we don't know where we're going and we don't agree on where we're going, what's the point?
You touched on a couple of things there. I want to come back to money communication because couples communication around money later, because that's a huge deal. But I also want to point out something else, though, that I've read about the psychology of money. I've talked to guests that talk about money mindsets, but One of the things that you're pointing at is when you get enough money stories, you get enough psychology that's playing in, you actually start getting money cultures too. It evolves into a
Mhm,
bigger thing that there's not just when you get a collection of stories, and I've never heard anyone reference it that way per se, but you start getting all of these stories that create this entire culture around money. And my wife and I were talking the other day about money, and one of the things that I noticed is we went to a event together, and there were certain family members on her side of the family that I know are dealing with major financial challenges and are very much deeply in debt. And
mhm,
yet those people showed up and there were diamond rings and jewelry and like it just looked flashy. And
mhm,
those people are affecting other people because the debt has crossed over between family members. And I just was sitting there going,
mhm,
hmm. And thinking about how what she struggles with is framed through that picture, and
mhm,
like, so there's these pictures and family members that were projected onto her, that debt, severe, extreme debt is a normal
mhm,
thing, even as long as you're getting this or that thing lived up. And she and I sat down and talked about it. And she's like, I deal with this weight that I carry that was
mhm,
shown to me that is really tough. And I'm not judging, a little bit I'm judging, but I'm not judging her at all, but I'm
mhm,
judging some of the maybe family members that kind of projected that. But coming back to the point that I'm trying to make, it wasn't until we sat down and had this conversation and talked about some of our
mhm,
struggles and the upbringing that I saw where she was coming from. And when I was able to see where she's coming from, it was something that was eye-opening for me. And at the same time, I'm gonna throw my side of the family under the bus a little bit too. We have extreme money avoidance, and money
mhm,
avoidance to an extreme is something that comes from, a certain lineage in my family and is something that has hindered my ability to make money because there was
mhm,
always this mindset of like, oh, if I do that, maybe it's going to be the thing that destroys our world if we make that change. And there have been a couple times that I turned down high paying jobs because I was worried that it would be destructive for my family. And I just
mhm.
sat there and thought, and maybe it might have been, but it might have been something that was positive and created this optimistic space. So I think that what's powerful is when we start talking about these things, maybe that other person can help us provide some insight as well.
Absolutely. And then also think about the message that you're sending to your kids about money too, because the
Yeah.
other thing is like, I always hear from parents, I want my kids to do better with money than I am. Well, why are you making them wait till adulthood to figure this out?
Yes.
Like,
Yes.
and so that there's a part of it too. And it's not that the parents want to make their kids wait till adulthood. They just don't know what to do to fix it. Like, I remember a lead saying to me, the only money skill I feel like I can teach my kids is how to make change. And that skill's even becoming obsolete. And so the marketplace has just shifted with the money so much that there really is more of a mental and like how we pick up money stories. We start forming these stories at like 7 or 8 years old. We don't ask to form these stories. It's just the environment we're in. And then we don't pick up at that age. How do they stick with us? How do we look at it through it? But yet it kind of plays a role in our lives. I mean, I'm going to tell you about a like when people talk about the budget, they're either team budget or team not. And if the couple keeps their conversation at this level, at best, they're going to have a miserable marriage. At worst, they're going to be divorced.
Yeah.
But they're not, like you said, they're not talking about the deeper levels of a budget, how maybe the wife doesn't want to do it because growing up, the budget was a weapon. Dad got it for what he wanted. Mom and the kids got nothing. And so she's like, I'm not doing a budget again. Makes sense. And then you have the husband whose parents made six figures. They were so bad with money, they went through evictions and foreclosures that they could have avoided. And he's like, I'm going to be the man of the house. My family's never going without a budget. But if these two people never tell each other that perspective, they can talk about a budget all day long and they're not going to get anywhere because I promise you, neither one of them is just going to give in to the other one. They're pretty solid in their point of view. and they're willing to die on the hill.
That's so spot on. And the wow, yeah, that's deep. That is deep. And you see these couples that there was one thing in there that I really liked. I mean, everything I liked, but the divorce and the struggles in the relationship. I've met couples that loved each other dearly.
Mhm,
They cared about each other beyond measure, but
mhm,
they were in a financial
mhm,
furnace that cranked up the heat. And one person was sitting there acting like it's a sauna, and the other person's getting toasted. And
mhm,
when you have these different perspectives, um, you know, I think back to my own family, and there was one of my family members that carried a heavy debt. And the other person says, I don't want this debt. One person wanted to buy a house and build assets, and the other person was not sure if they were going to stay in that place. And there was
mhm,
a house that my parents had an option to buy, and it was in the Napa Valley, and it was about $200,000 to $300,000 house. And they were like, wow, we could never do that. They were making good enough money to do it.
mhm,
If they had have bought that house now in the Napa Valley, that house would be worth about $6-7 million.
mhm,
And it was this perspective where they weren't making smart financial choices. And I
mhm,
think that what led to part of my own parents' divorce was some of the financial stress that was going
mhm.
on, and very, very different pictures about money. Very different pictures about money.
Right. And here's the thing, even if you do get divorced, you're still taking all this into your next relationship. And so
Yeah.
it doesn't serve you to not spend the time to clean this up.
Yeah, it doesn't. And you might have that's so spot on. Like you hear about the people who win the lottery and
Mhm,
they're broke again after 6-7 months, because they haven't worked anything. Those core
mhm.
pictures are still there. It's like unless you're uncovering things, it is a challenge.
For sure, because after you win the lottery, you don't see yourself as a person who has money. And if you don't think of yourself as a good money decision maker, you are not going to be making great decisions with money. And there's also a lot of what if I screw this up? What if this goes wrong? What if that goes wrong? What does so and so think? And there's just all these ways to get into our head when it comes to money, especially like with couples. I'll see someone who's very logical and they want to do the math. And so when they look at their income, that's pretty clear. They look at their debt, that's pretty clear. They look at all these numbers that are clear, but then they try to make them all play together. And then it's like, well, this doesn't seem to work and this doesn't seem to work. And then they get in this analysis of the paralysis where sometimes you're better off just choosing something and choosing it to be wrong, because by the time you choose something wrong to get to what you want, you're still further ahead than if you're still thinking about what to choose. But most
Yeah.
people are so scared to step into that because they don't want to feel that feeling of being wrong. They've been taught or been told or don't like that feeling of being wrong, but that's really where your confidence is going to come from, because I've run into too many couples who are looking for somebody to be their permission slip. I want you to tell me what to do, so if something goes wrong, I can blame you. And if that's you, do not reach out to me to coach you, because that is a no-go for me. But but it makes sense that people do that because they're that uncomfortable with it. And that's really what they need the coaching on when it comes to the money, not the handling the money, not the making the money. Like how do we work on this discomfort? Because this discomfort is not going to go away whether you have a little or a lot.
Yeah. It's not. And it's like I'm coming back to the gym analogy. Understanding and setting the awareness that I remember when I go to the gym and then I take a time away, a bit of a hiatus from exercising, and then I go back and it's awful. Like the first couple workouts back, it's horrible. And you're just like, why am I doing this? Everything hurts. But if you can have a level of communication and kind of make fun of that and say, hey, you
Mhm,
know what? This is going to be tough, but we've got each other. And
mhm.
this relationship is important enough that we can fix this. We can get through this.
Absolutely. And that's the power of what a coach can do for you because you both are going to have these types of blind spots. And as you elevate with the money, as you start getting out of debt, as you get your emergency fund, as you start saving for retirement, you're going to encounter a whole new set of problems. Now, these problems are fantastic. Don't get me wrong. But you're going to navigate these problems and you're not going to be sure what to do. And now that you have more money, mistakes are more expensive. When do we need to add so and so to our team? And so that's why when I develop my Agree and Achieve method, I look at the whole process like we would start with the end in mind and we want to make sure that end is protected. And then we cover everything else in between because that's really what you need is a decision making process as your wealth grows. Not just a decision-making process, we get out of debt, we check the box, we're done. Now we're gonna check the next box of doing our emergency fund. And yes, there's times we need to check the boxes, but your life is not a checkbox. Your spouse and your kids,
Yeah.
I pray to God they're not a checkbox. Like, we've gotta advance beyond this level of thinking into what do we want our life to look like? Why are we busting our ass at work all day? Why are we choosing to say no to these things to say yes to this? And if we're saying yes to the wrong things and no to the things that we don't want, that needs to be adjusted because that's part of the reason why your financial plan isn't working. But you're never going to see that in your numbers. And if you're just looking at the numbers, you're not looking at what are the decisions happening that are going into the numbers because you're using the numbers as the metric, not the quality of the decision.
I struggle at times with this because I'm very goals oriented and I make my checklist and to-do list for the day and I'm very OCD with it. But, I have to remember that the purpose of doing that is to create a space of ability to get things done, to be
Mhm,
successful so that I can spend more time with family, so that I can have a
mhm,
better level of personal time. So it's not like, like if I'm in study mode and my daughter comes up, Daddy, can we talk? Can we play? And I'm like, no, your time box is done for the day. It's like, you can't be so black and white, and
mhm.
so people don't understand that. So how do you communicate with them? How do you find ways to do that? I want to shift into something that you mentioned earlier, just in that last segment about your strategy. Talk to me. Is it green and clean?
I don't know if I'd call it green and clean. We like to have some gray and possibilities in my world. And so I really start with my method with more of like get clear on your desires. What do we want our life to look like at the end of this financial journey? When we're 60, 70, 80 years old and we're looking back on our life, are we going to look back and be like really proud of the work that we've done or are we going to be like we shouldn't have done these things? So let's get the end in mind because that's what we use to program the GPS. And then what are the challenges that we have to get there? And the challenges are some of the things that you talked about, that we've been talking about. So maybe some of the money stories in our head, maybe some of the financial decisions we're making, maybe debt's a huge blocker. Whatever it is, what are the challenges that are preventing us from getting to that, to get our desires and what we want? And that's what we use to choose the priorities. Because when I work with my clients, we can't do it all at one time, but we focus on
Yeah.
three priorities in our time together and we hit those three priorities with a vengeance. Once we know what those are, that's when we start building your personalized plan, AKA the budget. That's step 4. We don't do it step 1 in my world because if the budget isn't supporting where you want to go, you're not going to follow it. So there's no point of doing it. So let's make it worthwhile. Let's get you excited about it. And then we can have the best plans in the world and life's going to happen. Family member's going
Yeah.
to pass away. We're going to have that ER visit. We've got to be able to navigate all that and not let that event stop us on the journey because that happens a lot too. And so when we get those 5 factors working together, then all of a sudden something weird happens. We actually start having money.
Yeah.
And so now we have money that needs a team beyond my scope of expertise that we can make sure that you've got the right people as it grows. So like when I think of coaching and working with couples, I think of it like a football team. I'm your coach, the couple's the quarterback making the plays, but you've got the players on the team. You've got your CPA, you've got your lawyer, you've got your tax guy, you've got your insurance rep, whoever else we need on this team. And when the quarterback in football goes to make a play, they have a plan in mind, but the plan doesn't always go to plan. And
No.
so, like, if you get your CPA and your lawyer giving you conflicting advice, you're not going to put the two of them on the phone and tell them to work it out. You have to step up as quarterback and figure out, okay, why did these two players not get along? Or is it we just have a misunderstanding? Maybe we need to fire somebody. Maybe we need to fire both. Who knows? But you, as the
Yeah.
quarterback, have to be confident enough to make those decisions and get your team back to where you're making plays and winning again.
I love that. And there was an NFL player recently that was looking at buying a Tesla. And He, it was a $100,000 vehicle, and the dealership was trying to sell it for 2. It was some special modded out, and
Hmm.
he called his financial advisor and said, "Hey, is this I wanna buy this car." And, the financial advisor was like, "No, it's not in the cards. That is not a smart financial decision. You are not going to buy that car." And this guy was like, "This is the guy I trust more than anyone." So he walked away from the dealership, didn't buy the
Hmm.
car because, as a football player, he understands the idea of a coach, and the coach tells you what's best for you, and especially when you're juggling multitude of people and inputs and advice, and agendas. Everyone's got their own agenda, whether that's being to help you or to make more money by, you know, by billing you extra hours. I'm not putting down anyone, but like you do have to have a clarity and make sure that everyone's on the same page, and that's your page, and that's with your goals. So I love that you help people clarify their goals first and foremost because someone else's goal might not be your goal.
Correct. Or you might have what happened to one of my clients is she had someone on her team that she didn't feel comfortable with for 17 years. And I'm like, why are they still on your team? And she's like, well, it's just who my parents had. I thought I should use them. You've had a bad gut feeling about this person for 17 years. We need to figure out what's going on in your gut. And even though I'm not a licensed professional, I'm like, here's how we vet people, interview one. She found one she liked. She got her money rolled over, and that professional walked her through, hey, this is why your gut's been right for the last 17 years.
Yeah.
So, but she hired me because she's like, I'm just tired of this feeling. And I'm like, I was the first person that was like, we need to get to the bottom of this because if something feels off with your money, something's probably off. And
Yeah.
you're not going to sleep well at night. You're not going to make great decisions until you know what's off. You're going to be in your head. And just her having that and getting someone who was aligned with her vision, because a lot of the time she had this great vision and her financial advisor's like, your vision's stupid. And it's like, wait a second, it's your money. They don't get a vote in your vision.
Talk to me about this other concept that you had mentioned, money communication, because I
Mhm.
know that communicating about anything is not easy in life, honestly. Like when you start talking about things that are important, like I remember I worked as a teacher for a long time, and I remember doing the telephone game where you have someone say something and the next person repeats it. And one of the things that all of us remember from the telephone game is that the beginning message is never the end message, and
Yeah.
so communication in the best of times is difficult, and there are
Mhm.
windows like with me and my wife. I have learned to be very careful with communication because I love my wife, but she's super ADD and
Mhm.
she will get focused in on something. But I also noticed like last night after I finished my podcast, I went up to chat with her and I had a really great conversation and I wanted to share that with her. Excuse me, I got something in my eye. I wanted to share that with her. And when I got upstairs, I was getting ready to talk to her and it was late at night and she just was staring at her phone. And yesterday was a very stressful day, and I'm not judging her at all. I know why. Her little brother got married, and we've been preparing for that for weeks and months. And so it was a very stressful day. And at the end of the day, she just was like wanting to wind down. And I wanted to share something interesting. And suddenly I had to realize like now at this moment is not the time. And so
Correct.
my point being, with money, sometimes it never feels like there's the time because it's a stressful thing to communicate. It can be stressful for some people. It's not always stressful, but it can be. So,
Mhm.
how can we better communicate about money?
Yeah. Well, the thing with the money is the stress is always going to be there till you address it. And so it's
Yeah.
also a question of how much stress do you want to add to your life until you address it?
You're right.
Because a lot of times with money, we don't necessarily know, but then we like, instead of like figuring out what it is, we just are like, well, I don't know if it's this, and I don't know if it's this, and I don't know if it's this, instead of just being like, let's just find out the answer. And at least, even if we don't like the answer, let's know the answer instead of just wondering in this what if, because we can't fix anything in the land of what if. We need some direction to go off of. And money is going to make the decisions that you won't make. And so not talking about it is also a decision. And that
Yeah.
decision is going to show up in your money.
100%. It will be there unless it's always there, but it's gonna be something that it's better to shine a light on. It's
Mhm,
like, I love the analogy of if you have a problem, you can shine a light on it, but
mhm,
imagine that someone's got a basement and they just
mhm,
don't want to look at the basement and they hear a dripping noise down in the basement. And they're like, dripping noise. Maybe I should go down there, but I don't like the basement. I don't. The basement makes me feel
mhm,
stressed. Every time I go into the basement, I feel stressed. Well, so they don't go down there forever until they turn on the light and they see there's a foot of water on the floor.
mhm,
Or they could learn to look at that place. And they
mhm,
go down there, they overcome some of the fears, they clean up and fix the drip. And not only that, they sit there and go, hey, you know what? This could be a pretty nice extra room. This could be a family room. This could be a den. I've got this basement. It's a nice space. Maybe I could turn this into a place that not only is here, but validates me, that
mhm.
validates the life I want to have. And by putting some attention there, they slowly, not right away, begin to transform that space until the space is a space that gives them love and nurtures their life. It becomes a beautiful family room where they're able to live together and experience things together. With money, it's the same thing. If we're not looking at it, if we're not giving it the respect it needs and having a budget and becoming aware of it, then it's still doing its thing. It is still on its path. We just are not the ones that are steering that path.
It's steering ours.
Hmm. It is steering ours. And that is not normally where we want it to be going.
No, absolutely not, and it's gonna take work to clean up and get on the path anyway, so it's just adding more work to what needs to be done, and I don't know about you, I'm kinda lazy, I wanna do as little work as possible, so it's just easier and simpler to just manage it.
Yeah. Well, and there's one other thing to that too is like it's steering ours. And when you have multiple individuals that are all doing their thing with it, then you start
Mhm,
getting pulled in multiple directions. There's always this analogy I use on here when we talk about couples and finance, about people. And my wife and I went on vacation. We were in a kayak, and I wanted to go this way, and it was like those two people kayaks, and she wanted to go that way. So she starts paddling this way, and I'm paddling this way. And when you're going like this, we just started going in circles.
mhm,
And it wasn't until I sit there or so she said something or I said something, we were like, we're going in circles right now. We want to go the same way. Let us both row in the same direction. You want to go there? Sure. Let's go there first. And when we both started aiming toward the same goal, we got there fast. And then we
mhm.
spent a couple minutes there and I said, I want to go that way. We both aimed in that direction. We got there. If we hadn't have started working together, we would have been spinning for hours without accomplishing anything. But
Mhm,
once we were able to focus our intention, we were able to create something so much faster. Like you said, once you guys started working together, you
mhm.
were able to pay down this thing. Was it pay down some debt that you were working on?
We went from consumer debt to house in under 6 years. We paid off the consumer debt, house, yeah, all that, just under 6 years, done.
But you had to be focused on the same thing.
Mhm, yeah, and spinning in circles is a lot of work too. I mean, you're
Yes, it is.
dizzy, you're tired, you're on your feet, you're tripping, like, it's no picnic doing that way either.
It's not. It's not easy. And that's the thing. It's like, but if it's the only thing it's gonna be
Mhm,
what you keep doing. Which again is coming back to the coach. Finding a person who can
mhm,
give you an outside perspective and say, hey, do you guys know you're going in circles? We are?
yeah, and that's what it is sometimes you don't see it, and I'm horrible about seeing stuff in my own life, that's why I have a coach,
Right.
because it's so much harder to see this in yourself than seeing it in anyone else, and that's why when it comes to couples, it's so much easier to blame your spouse for their behavior than change their own. It's amazing. Like, all the times I'd just be like, "My husband just did this, and it'd be fine." And it took all the responsibility off me and putting all the blame on him, which wasn't fair to him at all,
Yeah.
because there was stuff I was doing that wasn't serving him either. And it makes sense that we did it because it's easy to ask other people to change because we don't have to do any work. And that's not gonna serve the relationship either if both parties aren't willing to make changes. I mean, even if you're a spreadsheet nerd and you're like, "I gotta have the numbers," but okay, if that's not what your spouse needs, we need to find a different way to do it. If
Yeah.
you want your budget online, your spouse is pen and paper, we've gotta work through that because just telling your spouse to do it your way because it's easier for you is not very kind or loving.
Yeah. It's so true. The the merging of different paths, it's like when my wife and I would like to work out together. One of the challenges is the things that I enjoy, she does not, you know?
Mhm,
And the things that she enjoys are not things that I am excited about. And finally, we had to realize that we both could have the same goals, but maybe we approach things in our own way. She
mhm,
goes and walks on the treadmill while I lift weights, or she goes to a dance class while I take a martial arts workshop. It can
mhm.
look differently for different people, but you have to have ways that you're approaching it that are on the same page. Now, let me ask you this. What are some of the financial tips that you would give a couple? If someone comes to see you, what are some of the most
Mhm.
common tips that you might be giving people?
Yeah, so in terms of the tips that I give the couples is just really, do you both want this do you both really want the same things? Do you even want to be on the
Mm,
same page with this person? And I know
right?
that question is like, well, they're married, of course I do, but we need to dig in on that and make sure that that's really what we want. And just also being like, "Hey, I have these goals and this vision for our relationship, like, let's get it defined." If your goal is travel and you're both like, "Hey, travel's the thing we're gonna go for," what does travel look like to you? I mean, because to one person, that could be around the world cruise on a yacht, to another one, that's going to third world countries on a mission trip. So let's make sure our
Yeah.
definitions of what we want for travel
Yeah.
are in the ballpark here. Not I mean, I'm not saying you can't go do both, but let's get this vision as dialed in as we can because you don't want to like think that you're working towards a vision for 20, 30, 40 years and then you get there and all of a sudden you're like, "Wait a second, you have that in mind?" Because you're going to look back and regret your entire journey. And
Yeah.
so we want to do what we I mean, and of course we're going to have regrets, but let's minimize regrets. Let's minimize all these things that can come up by just saying this is where we want to go. And if the vision changes 5 years in for both of you, that's not a problem. We got to start somewhere. Things are going to change, kids are going to grow, grandkids are going to come, people are going to move. It's okay that things change, but we've got to at least have a starting point or otherwise we're blindfolded, we're being spun around and being told to hit the bullseye on the dartboard. We're not
Right.
going to do that successfully.
Yeah. You're so spot on. And I love the idea of a dartboard as well, because it really is trajectory, And again, coming back to the analogy I had about rowing the boat, like if you're not on the same trajectory, it might be that both of you have a good plan. I
Mhm,
want to save money so we can travel. Well, I want to save money so we can get a new house. Well, hang on. I know both of you are wanting to save money, but the reality is if you have the goals that are not aligned, at some point in time, you start butting heads, suddenly, oh, we have enough for the trip. Let's buy it. Well, hang on. I want to save for the house. Well,
mhm,
you have this, and maybe you can have both, but you have to have the communication. And again, coming back to the communication,
mhm.
that's so important. And I think one of the things too that again is important to remember, it's okay to feel uncomfortable. It's okay for you to sit there and go, this is a little bit scary talking about this. The other day, my wife sat down and spoke about a financial topic with me that is something that it gives her stress. And it stressed me out a little bit after she was done talking about it. But I told her, I didn't sleep well the night after that, but it was something else that didn't cause me to sleep on. She's like, "Oh, I'm so sorry for talking about that thing we did." And I said, "No, no, no, no. It wasn't that. I didn't sleep well because of something else. I'm glad that we spoke about that. It was uncomfortable. But
Mhm,
now that you've put that out in the open, we can start creating solutions for something, and
mhm.
whatever it might be, um, if you can uncover it, it gives you a much better, or if you can communicate about it, even if it's uncomfortable, you get a starting point.
Correct, and that's what most people are missing is that starting point because 'cause they're just even scared to start because they're scared they're gonna start on
Yeah.
the wrong thing, And it makes sense because when you start something, you wanna get it right. Like, that's human nature. And that's gonna keep you playing small and having you live a life that you don't want, and you know what? You get the
Yep.
choice to do that. If that's your decision, great, go for it. And there's gonna be a lot of regret possibly when you look back on your life and go, "Wow, I could have done this differently," and none of us know when our last day is. It's too short. As someone who's had near-death
Yeah.
experience, I'm gonna tell you, life's too short to have regrets.
You
Need to get this stuff done.
you're spot on. And it's yeah, I want to reference something happening right now in the world. Like I was sitting there before we started this video watching the wildfires in Los Angeles,
Mhm,
and an absolute worst case scenario. We're talking 100-mile-an-hour winds that
mhm,
blew a fire that started out very small. It burned through. I was looking at the devastation in Pacific Palisades. Oh, we're talking a huge chunk of a city that just burned down.
mhm,
And this devastation came, and there was the interesting thing is that people had been hinting at it before. This could be bad. There could be something that comes, and it finally did. And it's like people were prepared, they were ready. But when you have these danger points that are not addressed,
mhm,
and it's like this a whole bunch of little things that add up to something devastating. And so you're right. We don't know when, whether it's our last day or whether there's a catastrophe coming or something like losing your house.
mhm,
It was interesting because there were people talking about losing their house, and it was a very affluent area and people that
mhm,
had, insurance, and so I saw some videos of people, and I mean, some celebrities that were walking through the remains of their houses, and they were like, well, you know what? What is the lesson here? It's okay. And I was thinking, and one of the things that popped into my head was, you've probably got money in savings. It's okay for you because you've also set aside and prepared
mhm,
financially. But there are people that deal with those challenges. You see, whether it be my family lived in Asheville, and the absolute
mhm,
devastation that hit Western North Carolina. And there were a lot of people that didn't have that financial nest egg and cushion. And I'm not guilting anyone who does. I wasn't trying to
mhm.
sound judgmental about that celebrity. Their loss is extreme. Someone else's loss is extreme. But if you've had that nest egg, if you have that preparation, it makes handling those storms much easier. And again,
Right,
we have to talk about it. We have to uncover it. We have to prepare for it.
right, and we also have to not guilt and shame the person who wasn't as prepared because for some people in Asheville, they
100%.
could have had 150,000, 200,000 in savings, and it wasn't enough.
Yep.
And
Yep.
to be that prepared is like, that's a win. That's a really good thing. Not guilt yourself because you didn't have enough. And so when when all those things come up too, those are gonna impact all their future money decisions because now this is another part of the money story.
Yep.
And that is something to really be aware of, like, not in the moment, because in the moment, do what you need to do, but in 2027, 2030, 2035, like, all these things, they're gonna remember this experience. You're not taking this away from them.
I want to poke at one thing you said right there as well, because I'm not prepared. Like, if I got hit with something big right now, and I do this podcast, and everyone thinks, oh, Sean's, he must be doing it, heading the right way. I started this because I was not, and I still am not. I am going through some of the Dave Ramsey baby steps, and I was like, ooh, I saved, you know, this much money,
Mhm,
and I'm happy about that. Part of my going down this path was wanting to um, get my financial ship righted and
mhm,
on track and heading in the right direction. And I love that you say not guilting people, because talking about this stuff, and I think that's one of the things too that comes into the communication is like, people feel guilt. I feel guilt
mhm,
every single time I talk about finances. I sit there and think about um, some choices I made, that when the
mhm,
pandemic was going on, I was working and I had time. So I took an acting class online. And I love acting and it was fun. But yet at the same time, I was like, dude, you know what? That money, I could have been doing online classes to learn a high paying skill. and maybe computer coding or learning about my personal finances. But instead, I spent that money and I was like, granted, there is and were some good things in that class about objectives and goals and obstacles that actually really plays into like the knowledge I have about money. So I did learn something that could be a skill that crossed over, but I could have also been learning a trade. I could have also been learning something that would have paid me in a side hustle. And even mentioning that right now, I feel guilt. And
Mhm,
once my wife brought that up. She's like, I supported you when you had all those weird side ambitions.
mhm,
So and it came up in our financial story. She didn't guilt me with that again. And I said, you know what? That probably wasn't the best decision. But there was a time where, and then, so now I know that it's sitting in the back of her mind and it makes me feel guilty. And so when I want to start addressing my financial mistakes in the past,
mhm.
I have to work past that guilt and I have to be ready to say,
Yeah.
wow, it's okay to talk about this.
And everyone has made a money mistake. I've made money mistakes too. And you know what? You're gonna make another one.
Yeah.
When none of us are perfect, I mean, I can promise you, I do this work. Do I make perfect financial decisions? Absolutely not. And I am just like, I'm human. I'm okay with it. But we also have to learn how to recover from it because if we guilt ourselves for the
Yes.
mistake, then we don't want to focus on how do we recover from a mistake. We want to avoid it. And it's like, we're not going to avoid them all. So we need to have a process of how do we recover from this? How do we rebuild trust if we need to? How can we trust our decision making? What did we learn in the decision making process that we now know that we didn't know? And that's so important that whatever financial coach you decide to hire has a process for that because this is just part of being human. This is going to happen again and again. And it's gonna happen less. It may not happen at the same scale, but you have to let this not knock you off the journey. This is part of the human experience and embrace it.
I remember I'm a black belt in Japanese style jiu-jitsu, which is kind of like judo. And I remember the first class that I had. No, it wasn't the first class that I had a heavy throw, but first couple months, I remember getting into class and my teacher, Dan, was showing me one of the throws I was going to learn.
Mhm,
And then he stepped in, and then suddenly my feet were in the air and I was flying, and my whole body hit the ground in a very heavy way. And I remember laying on the ground and looking up at the ceiling and going, ouch, that really hurt. And
mhm,
it was just the fact that I hit the ground. And I remember in that moment, sitting there, laying on the ground, looking up, going, wow, that was intense. And the thing with judo that you learn very quickly, the way to getting a black belt is not all about the throws. It's about getting up every single time that you've fallen.
mhm,
And, falling down is never fun. Whatever sport you're doing, wherever you're at in your world, and the art of winning is the art of
mhm,
standing back up and keeping on going. What was it? The success is falling down 7 times, getting up 8. And
mhm.
it really is a war of attrition. You have to just keep getting back up and keep moving forward. I posted about that on LinkedIn yesterday, that I see all these people on LinkedIn that are sharing these things. And I'm like, wow, that guy, he is winning. Well, you know what he's doing differently than me? He's just gotten up more times and he's
Mhm.
kept on going. And that there are times that when you get knocked down, you get knocked out of the game. And that's where you got to sit there and look. It's like right now, I was on a roll, charting tracking every expense. And then I let it slide. And I've gone 7, 8, 9 days now without tracking. And I've got all my receipts, I've got everything. And I was just like, you just have to jump back in. And I was like,
Mhm.
Sean, right now, do it.
Mhm.
And don't beat yourself up for it. But you got to get back up.
Absolutely.
What if you could go back in time and give your younger self some financial advice? What would it be?
Mhm. Don't stop the journey when you have your first kid, because we were on a great journey paying off debt, and we had our first child, and that's what we let us stop us for decades, because babies are expensive,
Yeah.
and we could have been here so much sooner had we not done that.
Uh, what type of a financial advice would you give to someone who's just had a kid then?
When you've just had a kid, I mean, obviously we need to make adjustments to the budget because we got diapers, wipes, all the stuff a baby needs, but it's not a reason to stop the plan. And we
Yeah.
use it as a reason to stop the plan, because there's all these cute things and all these
Yeah.
other things we can do. But you know what? Baby isn't going to remember any of that.
Anytime I hear people that are like traveling with a 1-year-old, like we want our child to see the world. They're not going to remember anything until they're like 5 or 6. Just take it easy. You've got time.